I want to introduce real quick our speakers. We got Charlie Kirkman. He's a manager of new business sales at ZoomInfo. Kayla, I forgot to ask you, Kayla, how to pronounce your last name. Is it Prunier?
It's Prunier unless you're French, and then it would be Prunier.
Okay, we'll go with Prunier. Senior Director of Sales of New Business, also at ZoomInfo. And then we got Charles Mulbauer on the call as well, a Sales Enablement Manager at AlphaSense, and posts a ton of discovery content that we all know and love. So great to have you three here. We're going to dig into discovery today. So our goal is to give kind of a state of the union of what's going on, what are we seeing, hearing, what are reps experiencing right now. We're going to dig into how to prepare for great discovery. And then we're going to spend the most amount of time that we can on just like really tactical, how to do great discovery, how to start conversations, how to ask great discovery questions, what to do in specific types of situations, and sort of everything in between. You guys cool? Ready to start?
Yeah, awesome. Ready.
Let's do it. So I thought I'd kick the first question over your way, Kayla. What have you seen, if anything, in the last maybe 3 to 6 months with the whole economic, kind of stuff going on? Have you noticed a needing of tightening around how we do discovery, or tightening up the sales process? Like, what are you seeing with your reps at ZoomInfo?
Great question. Yeah, I think we've seen a slight change in that sales cycles may be elongated, but candidly, like win rates are still super strong, and we're still really able to align a great solution to the problems that our prospects are seeing. I think it all comes down to understanding what your prospect's objective is, genuine curiosity, so that you can determine if you're going to be a great fit or not for that prospect. And then tailoring a solution that meets their needs really starts with understanding their journey and what they're looking to accomplish, and timelines, and the stakeholders that are involved. What are their objectives? You may have 3, 4, 5, or even 7 different buyers that you're needing to speak with and understand what's important to them. And so being a bit more thorough, controlling what we can control. We'll talk a little bit later on about preparedness, and asking like really intentional questions to help you understand and to help your buyer understand if we're going to be a great fit or not, and how we should continue with that sales cycle.
Got it. Okay. Charlie, on the topic of like really thinking about what the buyer's trying to accomplish, one of the things that we talked about when we were prepping was, we tend to have, let us know in the chat if you have something kind of similar in the way that you guys have your CRM set up, is the sales process, at least how it's documented in the CRM and the stages, tends to be very like sales activity focused, like qualification, intro call, demo call. It's very sales focused versus what the buyer is actually trying to accomplish. Let us know in the chat. Give me a yes or a no. Does that sound a lot like the CRM stages you might have in Salesforce or HubSpot? Qualification, intro call, getting a lot of yeses there. So Charlie, when you think about what Kayla sort of talked about there around like aligning, how should we think about how like we run our sales process versus how people buy, and like what the customer journey tends to look like?
Sure, and it really is understand like what these guys are going to have to go and do on our behalf, on their back end. The champion's most likely going to sell the deal internally rather than us, right? So we really got to be helping to coach these guys through it, because I think that now, in particular, we're seeing deals that just impact one individual's job, helping them out. Very, very difficult to sell now. Deals which are selling to one company's even department, more difficult to sell than they were. We've really got to be tapping into those company holistic goals. And for that reason, understanding what exactly this ties back to, what we're actually going to affect at the company level is going to be way more impactful. And then, of course, we've got those new personas coming in as well. And these are perhaps personas that our buyers haven't been dealing with as much until now. Like that finance title, we're coming across way more often than we previously have. And our buyers are finding that as well. But again, like we've dealt with these buyers, the finance title more than they have, and helping them understand what it is can get through it. So in that sense, yeah, absolutely. The buying journey, I think, is super important for the champion. We need to be coaching them through it and understanding who else is going to be involved and how we can tie that back to company goals. Otherwise, we're probably going to have a struggle ahead in the current economic times.
Got it. So I hear just already a theme around, I think where the conversation is going to focus a lot today is this word alignment comes up a lot, where it's like, how do we align not only to what this individual is trying to accomplish, but an actual business priority and a business outcome that people are trying to accomplish, and the problems, and then also like stakeholder alignment. Charles, before we get into a lot of the, he's like, hey, before we get into a lot of the very tactical stuff that you tend to talk about, I'm kind of curious from your perspective, is when things get a little tougher during like economic type of situations that we're in right now, do you feel like it's as much like, oh, things are, different and we need to like kind of do different things? Or is it more like we should have been doing all of the stuff that we should have been doing all along? It's just now being, it's more visible, I would say. If reps aren't doing the things that they're supposed to do, it get exposed a little bit more. What are your thoughts on that?
Amazing question. I think that we can all agree, Kayla, Charlie, and myself, as well as you, Jason, that tougher economic times actually empower a salesperson to realize that this is how to actually sell. Because if you can do that in a tough economic time, that means you can kill it even more in a great economic time. And that's when we go back to fundamentals. And some of the things that I was thinking about without getting too tactical, that Kayla and Charlie were talking about, was a big thing that works for me and for the reps that I coach at AlphaSense is during a tougher economic time, we tend to be a lot more direct. All right, I coach them to be a lot more direct with prospects. That includes looking for trouble early. And that also includes, to be much more specific, I actually encourage my reps to tell the prospect the reasons why people do not buy from us in the beginning, without getting into how that might sound like. But I might say a little bit, Charlie, just to give you some context, the top 3 reasons why people don't buy from us, the biggest reason, I should say, is when there are challenges that we solve for, don't tie into the goals of the organization. So maybe you can walk me through what those goals are, right? So it's like starting with why people don't buy from us, and that's a lot more direct. And I find that lowers resistance. So just to circle back, it brings us back to fundamentals.
Yeah. So I'll kind of open this up for the crew here. This looking for trouble early thing, I think, is really interesting. And starting with the reasons why people don't buy, and kind of what I hear there is a theme of, how do we find out if someone's really serious before we invest a bunch of time into this deal? How do we find out how serious these people are? How do we figure out if this person actually has something that will help the business, or a project that they want to help the business, that there's an actual problem? So I'll just kind of open this up for the group. What are your guys' thoughts on, before we dig into this discovery piece, what are some early signs that you look for to really help give, a rep guidance on whether or not it's like good for them to be spending a ton of time on this deal?
I like Charles's point. You could say it's maybe going negative in the beginning, but I think that it's just opening up dialogue. And so it's genuine curiosity, and it's aligning with your prospect. One way that we better understand a prospect's timeline early in the conversation, and this certainly, I didn't create this. I think part of being great at sales is being able to implement something that you heard on a call that really landed well. And one thing a bunch of our team members will do is they'll say, hey, Charles, when folks come to Zoom Info, usually they're in one of 2 camps. They're either looking to understand more about what we offer for a decision that might happen in the back half of the year, or you needed a solution like Zoom Info yesterday. Charles, what camp would you put yourself in? And so we're disarming, right? It's not It's not like, hey, Charles, trying to figure out if I want to spend time with you or not. It's just really trying to understand their journey and where in their journey are they, or where in the journey is the company.
By the way, I love that Kayla just said that, because I talk about two camps all the time. And just to add to what Kayla just said, it also indirectly communicates to the prospect that it's okay if you're in the camp where like it's not serious. Like we're both adults. I promise you it won't be the first time, it won't be the last time. And so let's get real fairly quickly. So I talk about two camps all the time. So I love that, Kayla.
Sure. And I think another thing which we look to is understanding, once they've given us their goal, and of course, like some metrics around that, either look into like positive business outcomes. You know, if you guys had that time back, which you told me, like, how would you reinvest that time? What impact would it have on the org? Or potentially the implications, right? The old spin style, but looking, okay, cool. Like, if you guys continue to do what you're doing at this moment in time, how's that affecting the business in, say, a 6-12-month time frame? If the people we're speaking to haven't got clear ideas around these, then we're either probably speaking to either the wrong person, or if we know it's the wrong person, then we're like, this is definitely a problematic deal. Because if the right person doesn't know the answers to those questions, it's probably not a serious initiative, which we're going to be able to sell to.
Okay. Let's I feel like people are chomping at the bit now to get like into we might go a little out of order, everyone. We can talk about the preparation piece. I think we'll talk about that second. And I want to talk about the actual call, because we're digging into like different components. I want to spend some time first on when we get a prospect in an intro call, the first 5-10 minutes, let's focus on that piece. So this two camps kind of thing that we have upfront contracts, we have sharing an agenda, all of that kind of stuff. And I'll kick this question your way, Charles. What are we trying to accomplish if we just look at the intro and getting off to a really good start? What are some of the components there for you?
Yeah, if I were to give it like a title, we want to, the purpose of all of these things, they all roll up under managing expectations. The famous equation, reality minus expectations equals happiness. I find actually that a lot of calls go south very quickly if the prospect and I don't know early, why are we on the call? What is the purpose of this call? What are we going to do? What are we not going to do? Right? That has to be done very early, because we've all experienced, everyone on this call, where you will be on a call with a prospect. They think they're coming on the call to do X, when really you wanted to do Y, and that isn't discussed. And then there's a mismatch and the call falls apart. Now, even if there is a mismatch, it's discussed early and you can compromise. Okay, we'll do that. We'll also do a little bit of this. And you mentioned we're going out of order in this conversation. Now, the beauty of knowing like how to run a discovery call is it's cool if you can go out of order, because you always know how to go back on the road, so to speak, and be able to meet the prospect in the middle. And without getting into the nitty gritty of how to do it and all that stuff, that's what it comes down to. And by the way, it's not unique to the first call. You want to manage expectations on every discussion. What's the purpose of this call? What's the purpose of the next call? What are we going to do in the next call? What are we not going to do? What can I expect from you? What can you expect from me? And that's always part of a solid sales process and sales discussions.
It's just good business acumen too. You know, if you want to sell to executives, that's what every executive like wants. A lot of the companies I work with have a culture. There was this VP I was working with, and he was a new VP that I had worked with at a previous company. He just was in his first couple of months at a new gig. And one of the things that he was instilling in his culture is, hey, we do way too many internal meetings. And if there's not an agenda in the calendar right for the meeting, it's going to get canceled. We're not going to do the meeting. And just having like a clear idea of like what we're going to be talking about and what the goal is that we're going to accomplish, it significantly increases your business acumen. And like executives, especially busy people, will want to spend time with you if you're very organized. So Kayla, you have some in that upfront agreement, there's like a really good talk track that you guys use and that you teach. How do you recommend tactically that someone kicks off the call? What are kind of the different components there in that first maybe few minutes, 5-10 minutes of an intro call?
Charles summed it up beautifully by saying you're managing expectations. Mm-hmm. For me, it's a little odd if you aren't letting your prospect know during the first 5 minutes what you're looking to achieve and asking them what they're looking to achieve. Like, otherwise, it's all about us. I have an agenda. I know what my agenda is, right? Ultimately, I'm trying to earn this person's business, but what's their agenda? What are they looking to accomplish? And I think a great way to open up a call is to be genuinely curious. And it means that your agenda may actually need to be modified. And that's okay, because we are curious as to what our prospect is looking to achieve. And so an upfront agreement could be, hey, Charles, I'm really looking forward to learning about your business today, what your current state is, and the goals that you're looking to achieve. I have 30 minutes dedicated for us. Does that time still work well for you? Yes. Charles, what I'd like to do is understand current state, really do a deep dive into what a day in the life as an account executive at ABC company is like. And from there, if we have time, I'll jump into a quick demo, show you how I would use Zoom Info if I was in your spot, Charles. And then a good next step for us and success for me would be getting David on the call so that we can share this with him together. It looks like he's the Chief Revenue Officer at ABC Company. Charles, what are you looking to accomplish today? And what does great look like at the end of this meeting for you?
By the way, I love that. Sorry to jump in here. I also sometimes joke around and I might say, what's also success for me is if you say, Charles, this is the worst thing I've ever seen and I don't want to talk to you again. That's also success.
Yeah.
So, and it'll get a laugh out of people sometimes.
And we can part ways adding each other to our network, because really one of two things is going to happen.
Yeah, and I think even when we're talking about, setting those up next steps at the end of the call, even in the agenda of saying, look, and if we still feel that we've got a good fit then, and giving them the option to opt out early, opt out often, because we want to be respectful of everybody's time, our own and theirs, right?
So another thing that you did there, I'm going to drop into the chat, is you kind of planted this seed that there's going to be other people involved in the conversation. Can you share a little bit more about that, Kayla? Why in the very beginning of the very first call that you have with a prospect that you plant the seed that other people are going to get involved?
Yeah. I mean, just if you can drop a smiley emoji in the chat, if this has happened to you before, that would be great. You don't set an upfront agreement. You know that you're meeting with someone who's going to be an amazing champion and who's going to be able to help you sell your service or product. But you also know that they're not the full buying committee and the price may scare them. But you don't align upfront. And at the end of the meeting, the conversation gets slightly combative because they're pushing for pricing and you don't feel comfortable giving it to them because you think they're going to walk. Just show of hands or an emoji if that's happened to you before. Great. You're not the only one, as you can see, right? Everybody has had this happen to them. Literally everybody. And so what do? We set up expectations, manage expectations, and align on what great looks like within the first 5 minutes of the conversation, just like Charles said. That way, you're having open dialogue, you're having a conversation, and you're aligned on what good looks like and what a next step could look like if we decide we're going to be a great fit for each other and we want to move forward to have a next meeting or continue the conversation.
Yeah.
And I want to add to what Kayla said, if that's cool. One pretty obvious thing, one less obvious thing is an upfront contract belongs on every call. I think some people believe it's just for a first call. All calls have an upfront contract. And the second thing is, for fun, actually, depending on what you're selling and depending how often you're running into prospects that think you do something that you don't, after the upfront contract, I like to tell prospects, by the way, there happens to be, unfortunately for us, for one reason or another, some misunderstanding around what we actually do versus what people think we do. Is it all right if I give you some context on what we don't do first? It changes things up. again, it's really depending on what you're offering and what types of experiences you're having with prospects. If you feel you're talking to prospects that for some reason consistently don't understand what you do or have some sort of misconception about what you do. So that's something that I like to do also as part of an upfront contract, again, depending on what you're selling. But I love that.
Got it. So step number one, let's make sure that we manage expectations. So make sure the prospect knows exactly what to expect in the call. Plant the seed around next steps and what those look like. I cannot tell you how many calls I listen to where they don't talk about what's going to happen at the end of the call and what the next step is, right? And then also making sure that you let them know that you have questions and want to learn more about what they're trying to accomplish. I know it sounds so obvious, but I listen to many calls and I've been on the receiving end of a lot of calls where I just get talked at the entire time, or I get qualified the entire time. And as much as people talk about how bad that is, it happens a lot, so many times. That's the experience that your buyer's used to. So Charlie, I'll kick this next question your way. So we talked about expectations. Now it's time to kind of shift into more of like the meat of the call. And what I find is that for a lot of reps, it can be kind of hard to get the conversation started in a place that's going to really get the buyer talking and be really productive, and to kind of focus the conversation so that it doesn't go into well, hey, what's your pricing? I want to see a demo, all of that kind of stuff. So what do you recommend, Charlie? Once we set expectations and it's time to dig in here, what are some ways that we can kind of get the conversation started in a way that could really help us focus on something that's going to move the conversation and the deal forward?
Sure. So I think the outcome from the first question that we're trying to drive is probably at best implied pain, right? They're not going to turn up and say, hey, look, we need to hit XYZ revenue goal because we need to do that to get our Series A funding. And that means that our CEO is going to buy a new house and we're all going to get loads of leads and it's going to be great, right? So in that sense, if we're inbound, I think we've absolutely got the right to say hey, what brought you through the door? What piqued your interest of us, and set the scene that way. Outbound, typically the best way I've seen do it, and again, can't take copyright for this, but it is similar along. Look, aside from my SDR being absolutely fantastic at their job, what piqued your interest in taking the call today? And it will always get a little chuckle, and they will give us a rumbling of implied pain, right? Well, maybe it's taken us a little bit too long in order to do this. Maybe it's taken us, it's taken us too long to do that. Okay, cool. And then we can turn that explicit and mate, how long has it taken you guys? But really, we're looking for those early rumblings of pain that we can then pick up on with curiosity.
Yeah. What do you do in that instance when a prospect is I don't know. I mean, you guys reached out to us. I'm kind of curious to learn more about Zoom info.
100%. And I totally get that, right? In that sense, I'm sure you wouldn't put half an hour in your day for fun, right? Between us. So out of interest, what would you hope that we could be able to do for you guys based on the call you had? They're not just putting half an hour in their diary for fun, even if they try and tell us that they are. And alluding to that fact, we should get something implied, which we can then start to work with and see whether we can help them solve or not.
Got it. Charles? Go ahead, Kayla. Go ahead.
I think that's a very real scenario, especially when we do go outbound. Oftentimes, folks are taking a call because something piqued their interest, but they may not have done research prior to the call. And candidly, it's not really their job to have had to. It's our job to figure out how we might be able to serve them. They may genuinely not know what your company does. And so I think one way that you can warm that up a little bit so that they don't have the experience that Jason just spoke about, being drilled with 21 questions or feeling like it's an interrogation or a 20-minute monologue that isn't conversational. It goes back to preparedness. You can do some research prior and understand companies in a similar space that you serve and how they're using your tool or service. And you can use that to warm it up. And you can use that to see if there's similarities. Hey, Charles, we currently work with 300 security companies in a similar space to yours that have under 100 employees. Here's how we help them. Right now we're helping them uncover warm leads. We're helping them automate their go-to-market process. And we're helping them win more. Do any of those three areas spike your interest, and any of them you want to learn more about? Because I'll tailor that conversation to those points. You can also use like a deck as an aid. Oftentimes you'll pull up a deck or a presentation, and that's when that 10-minute monologue happens. What if you have a slide that has different personas and the areas that you're helping them from a go-to-market standpoint, right? Hey, Charles, here are the 8 different personas that we help and the challenges that we solve for. Do you mind taking just a couple minutes and scanning this slide and picking out 2 to 3 areas that you want us to focus on today? That way I'll really be able to tailor the conversation and a solution to your needs.
Goes back to that, Charles. Sorry.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Go ahead. Your the 2 camps, right? Similar as you were saying earlier, Charles. And Kayla, like using that deck maybe, but again, like that 2 camps talk track, absolutely got it into elevator pitch. Here's the pain points we typically solve. Do either of these resonate with you, or you experience something different in the market?
Yeah, I love what Charlie and Kayla are both saying. It's excellent. And I think that what people don't necessarily pay enough attention to is the timing of all these things. We all sell different things. We all sell different offerings to different prospects. And especially being at AlphaSense, I'm realizing that it's important to understand what the successful sales process looks like at your company, because for some companies, it actually works very well if you're selling to the same persona every time to talk about problems very early. But for a lot of companies that are selling to a whole variety of personas, and each persona doesn't necessarily describe their title the same way as all the other personas in the same bucket, you don't want to do it that early. Kind of want to understand what they do a little bit first, as opposed to if you're selling to the same persona, you don't necessarily have to do that. So it really depends on what you're selling to and the timing of all these questions, when to actually bring up problems. Of course, how to do it is obviously extremely important. Jason, you had an awesome post, which may be basic for a lot of us on the call, but not basic for a lot of people, which is what we call here at AlphaSense suggestive discovery. Sorry, I'm having trouble speaking today, which Charlie and Kayla pretty much just did, what we're seeing, client voice. But to know when to bring that up is crucial, depending on who you're selling to and what your experience is. Because you might come off as too aggressive too early, or a lot of times the prospect might be like, well, let's back up for a second. Let me tell you a little bit about what I do. So again, it depends on what you're selling.
You also run the risk of, if you don't suggest something that's even relevant to what they're looking for, you could like run the risk of them feeling like you don't understand what they're trying to accomplish at all, and you're not the right person to talk to. And I want to zoom out a bit. Let me know here on the call if you disagree. I feel like one thing that's so important to do very early in discovery is to demonstrate like acumen and understanding around how people like this prospect, their peers, like what they care about and what they're running into. And Rain Sales Group did a really interesting study. I think they pulled like 1,500 B2B buyers that made billions of dollars worth of buying decisions. And 58% of them felt like sales meetings they attended were a waste of time. And it was because they didn't feel like the salesperson really understood what they were trying to accomplish or understood their situation. And I feel like what we're trying to do is like early is try to show them that like we work with a lot of people like you, but like I really want to understand your situation. And we've run into this a lot of times too. And like that feeling of being understood, I think, is a really crucial part of discovery. So if we kind of go, I think the takeaway here is that if you have a similar customer that you've worked with, and based on your research, which we'll unpack here in a second, if you can suggest things because you've seen the situation a lot between your preparation, it really gets the call started off on a good foot. That's really kind of the big takeaway here. So if we kind of move into the next part, and Kayla, I'll kick this question your way, is what are we trying to accomplish next? And I feel like there's a lot of avenues that we can go here. But one of the things that we've talked about so far is, positive outcomes that people are trying to accomplish. So a future state. We've talked about problems in the current state. How do you kind of guide the conversation from there? Let's say that, yeah, that sounds really familiar, Kayla, to something that we're experiencing right now. What are kind of the boxes, in no particular order necessarily, that we're trying to kind of check there in the next 15, 20 minutes, depending on how long your call is?
Yeah, I think that ultimately you can start to, once you've unpacked what their general problems are, you can start to ask more leading questions that may help you understand if the issues that they're having align with solutions that you can offer. And it's not just one question. I think we don't want to be lazy with our line of questioning. And when you get a great answer, you have to go one level deeper. And so that might be, we're really having a hard time isolating companies that are in market needing our services right now. We have a huge target addressable market, but we're seeing with the economic climate, not everybody has an appetite to buy. That's a great answer. But you need to go one level deeper. Help me understand why that would be important to you, Charles, and what outcome would it drive for the business if you were able to isolate those companies that need your services and products now? What's the why? Genuine curiosity. Like when you get an answer, don't be so quick to talk. Another question.
So I call this chunking up. Are you trying to take something that's like situational, that they're running into a symptom, so to speak, and chunk up to an outcome? We're trying to quantify this in some sort of way.
That's a great way of describing it, Jason.
Got it.
I think
Charles.
Go ahead, Charlie. Sorry.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Thank you. Sorry. I think one of the reasons why it's so important as well, that suggestive question at the beginning around some of the other clients' problems which we've helped to solve, is this gives us like an underlying credibility throughout the call, that we are actually there to provide value to these guys, right? We're on this call because we speak to other individuals who are in their position all day, every day, who they probably don't even have access to that many other people who are in their similar sorts of roles outside of groups that they may meet up with and speak to once a month. We can offer them genuine insights in that. And then when they do give us an answer, which is so clearly aligned to our product, it's fantastic. Like you said, Kay, like where they describe the exact problem which we solve. Because we've got that underlying assumed business acumen and credibility, we can then play a little bit dumb as well. And I say, look, my friend, like, I hear that a lot, but I hear it for a lot of different reasons from a lot of the customers I speak to out of interest. Why would that be important for you guys? Rather than just saying, oh, why? It's quite accusatory as well. We frame the question a little bit nicer, stay genuinely curious, because the answer we get may actually really, really surprise us. And that may be the key to unlocking more stakeholders, larger deals, company initiatives. So really important on suggestive questioning again.
I love that part of what Charlie's talking about. Jason, in the course that you just came out with John Barrows on cold calling, you talk about call reluctance, right? And I think there's Kayla talked about genuine curiosity. I think there is a curiosity reluctance actually that AEs have. The reason why they have it is because they're afraid that if they just start being curious, they'll lose control of the conversation and start forgetting what to ask. That's a big fear. And there's a reluctance to be curious. And unfortunately, that reluctance to be curious destroys a good conversation, when we all know sales is counterintuitive, for better or for worse. And when you can open up a pocket, I like to call them pockets of curiosity, like just let go for a little bit. Just, you don't have to let go for the rest of the call if you're having trouble with curiosity. Let go for 2 minutes. Take it easy. Open up a pocket of curiosity to practice the muscle. And then it allows you to be more present, be more liberated, have more fun in the conversation. And then over time, you'll see that naturally the conversations, the questions, that you had written down to ask just come across better and come across without you having to think about it. So that's something that came to mind for me as Kayla and Charlie were sharing their insights.
Love that. And depending on how technical what you sell is, sometimes I hear a fear around, well, this might open up something for this, VP of engineering that I'm talking to or whoever, where they're going to start asking me all these really technical questions that I need my SE for, kind of thing. Charles, I wanted to kick this question your way around the topic of questions. When we think about how to structure a question, I find that questions are the answers that we get from prospect are kind of like a garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. They're usually the result of the quality of the question. So if we're getting bad answers and answers that aren't detailed and that don't really help us, it's usually the result, in my experience, of a question that was poorly asked.
Right.
So we use, we're trying to connect to business goals, priorities, outcomes. We're trying to figure out a quantified goal that they're trying to accomplish. So if you kind of look at it through that lens, how do you think about structuring questions? Because this is the thing that I see missing in most discovery conversations. When we look at it, I'm like, there's no goal here. You don't know what they're trying to accomplish. You don't know what it's attached to. You don't know who else thinks that this is really important. So it's a long-winded way of asking, how do you think about questions through the context of figuring out what people really want to accomplish? Because this is where a lot of people tend to get stuck.
Yeah, that's a very tough question. Structuring questions, I could talk about that for 4 hours. So Kayla and Charlie, so thank you for that. Kayla and Charlie already touched upon the answer very well. I'm going to say that the one word I think was already mentioned in this conversation that comes to mind when structuring questions and how I structure questions and how I help my reps structure questions is to make sure that the questions that are structured are under, if I were to give it a title again, I'd give it a title of disarming. So I want to be disarming as I possibly can, because when I'm disarming, I can also be extremely direct. I'll give you just one example that I'm thinking about on my feet when it comes to quantifying an outcome. So let's say you're in a position where you're talking to prospects where you feel awkward asking the question, what is can you quantify the outcome, right? It just sounds weird. It feels weird. I feel robotic. I might say, Jason, one of the toughest things about my job here at my company is that I find when I talk to folks like yourself, it depends really on who I'm speaking with and the day and the time and so on and so forth. But I find it very difficult for me to kind of understand how they quantify the outcome or the challenge if they don't solve for it, or if they do solve for it, depending on what I'm talking about. I find it's very hard for them to quantify. Some have told me they quantify it this way. Some have told me they quantify it that way. So it's different for everyone that I talk to. I was curious what comes up for you. So I'm falling on the sword, literally what you were talking about. I'm referring to the other course, the cold call course, but I think you were talking about, right, in therapy, when you share something with somebody about yourself, then they become the person you're telling that to. Well, you become closer to them. And by default, because you're vulnerable, they'll want to save you. So I talk a lot about humbling disclaimers. Anybody that follows me, I talk a lot about humbling disclaimers. Jason, you and I talked about it a number of times. And a humbling disclaimer is also I'm not sure how to ask this question exactly, or I feel a little weird asking this, but I was wondering, and that helps all, again, roll up under the title of being disarming. And that helps the prospect to two things. One, they want to help you. Two, they'll lean in more. And then by default, I guess the third bucket, really three things, is the chances of them giving you a truthful, more accurate answer is a lot higher. This is how I structure questions, and that was really long.
Yeah, there is so much to unpack there, and I want to spend some time on this. But one thing that sticks out to me is the question provides, I call it question stacking, and it's like stacking context in front of your question. Because if you just ask, how do you measure XYZ, you're not showing the prospect in any kind of way that you talk to a lot of people like them and that you have acumen in this area. Because I asked this, believe it or not, even SDR teams, the way that they quantify like if they were to make a big investment in technology or training, the way that they quantify the outcome is like very different across a lot of organizations. Sometimes it's going to be qualified meetings booked. Sometimes it's going to be sales accepted opportunities, and like everywhere in between. And oftentimes, in my opinion, they're measured on stuff that is kind of unfair for them to be measured on because they don't really impact it. But if I don't say that and say, hey, I'm really curious, because a lot of SDR leaders measure, like their key KPI that they're measuring is very different across most of the organizations. Sometimes it's qualified meetings, sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that. How do you think about it? It's just so much easier to answer that question if I'm a prospect. Like I want to lean in, and I love the disarming, kind of piece of it. Charlie, what's kind of coming to your mind when you think of questions and really figuring out what a prospect is trying to accomplish? What would you add?
Yeah, I think Charles's point was absolutely brilliant. In my career, we've called it framing, how to frame questions, because it's incredibly difficult to get just a relentless 21 question sheet out. And it comes back to the initial point, right at the start of this webinar, about that prospect feeling understood and on their buying journey, and helping them understand that, look, we understand your persona, we understand other challenges which you guys have had. I think is massively important. I would also lean towards phrasing questions in a how and what, more so than why. Only because I find sometimes the why tone can be a little bit accusatory. So when I'm thinking about the kind of questions which I'm asking, which may be a little bit different but deliberate when I do them, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, you guys mentioned that you guys are looking to move into Colombia. What's so attractive about Colombia for you guys? And that's just taking a why and changing it to a what, right? How comes you guys are looking at Colombia? What makes it attractive? It's a very, very subtle difference, but I feel that we definitely get better responses from them once combined with framing as well.
I love that. I'm going to say something very quickly. What's an underrated word also, to Charlie's point, what's a very underrated word that people don't use that much is when. When does that happen? When was the last time that happened? It's just, when is very underutilized. So I love what Charlie just said.
And to double down on that, I think that future state question is really powerful as well. Like when you think about XYZ, what, fill in the blank, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that too.
And such small nuances, but what Charles and Charlie are mentioning just reminds me of how the best sellers are playing a bit of chess, not checkers. And so Charles talking about the psychology behind, if you're vulnerable, your prospect is more likely to be vulnerable. It's all very thought out. It isn't by chance. Charlie not asking why questions, because that could, you might receive more of a defensive response, because likely the reason why is because they helped set that process or service up, right? But using a what, a how, a when is going to likely have a more positive response. So the way that they're framing up these questions are well thought out.
And to Kayla's point, I'm just going to share a quick anecdote. I remember selling to a hedge fund analyst, and I asked the analyst, when was the last time this issue that he shared with me happened? And he told me a story. And I'm listening to the story, and I'm totally present in the moment. And after he told me the story, I was like, wow, that's crazy. And he went further. He told me how crazy it was, how much he can't stand it. And that was just because I was listening. I was like, that's a crazy story. And opening up a pocket of curiosity. I feel that a lot of us are taught to tell stories, come up with stories to prospects, but a lot of these questions get them to tell you stories, which is way more powerful. And a lot of things that we're talking about, what Charlie's mentioning, what Kayla's mentioning, is forget about the prospect. This makes your job more fun. I have more fun, Jason, that you call the question stacking. I'm having more fun at my job doing that than like, whoa, what's the outcome? I don't enjoy that. When you're having more fun, it's going to come across. And these are ways to be selfish for us to have more fun and to feel freer. And that comes across.
Yeah. And when you think about in Challenger speak, it's the mobilizer. When you think about if you got a good champion or potential champion on a call, the way that you get people to mobilize is getting them to share stories and things about like the trials and tribulations that they're experiencing right now on their journey to like accomplish an outcome. And if you don't have the stories on both ends, there's no like emotional attachment to the project that you guys are talking about, So I want to open it up again around stories. Does everyone here think about stories and how they get incorporated into discovery, especially in that first call? How do you guys think about that? Go ahead, Charles.
Just because I'm smiling? That's terrible. I got to be more serious. It's a tough question to answer, like standing on one foot. I feel that the way I think about stories is in two ways, three ways, I should say. Number one, if I'm an AE, I try to read as many case studies as I can because it makes me more confident in the things that I'm actually saying. This literally happened to somebody. So I don't feel that I'm like faking it to making it, so to speak. Like we literally have a case study. This is literally what they had a problem with, right? So I try to study as many of those as I possibly can so that when we are question stacking, so to speak, I can bring those stories for myself into the conversation and use client voice like Kayla and Charlie were referring to earlier. So that's one way I think about stories. The other, I guess, more obvious way is if I'm having a great conversation with my prospect, I might say, yeah, Kayla, that's so interesting you're saying that. I'm not sure if you're familiar with XYZ company they play within your space. Are you familiar with them or not really? No, I don't know who they are. Well, it's funny because we were talking about that specific issue, and the other things that they told me were X, Y, and Z, or the other thing that they realized that I didn't even realize was A, B, and C. I was curious to what extent that surprises you, right? So I'm just talking about stories in a natural way of any conversation that I would have in real life. One thing that I particularly like to do is a lot of AEs feel like they have to feel like they know everything, which is so not the right approach. I might ask Kayla, before I make any assumptions, who would you say you compete with directly in your space? Kayla, everyone likes to share their competitors. Well, this person, and they might say, well, we can be A for this reason and B for that reason. And all of a sudden, in my head, I'm like, oh, we work with B. And I'll just start talking about them. So I try to allow the prospect to help me and take the onus off of myself and let them do some of the work so that I can tell better stories. So that's how I think about stories.
Yeah. The humbling disclaimer piece is so big. If you just come in and with genuine curiosity and like lack of assumptiveness around the other person and their situation, it's amazing how much people will open up to you.
Yeah, no downsides. There's no downside to ever saying, "Hey, look, before I make an incorrect assumption here, people don't want to be told that you're assuming, right? Like, it's like when we're setting up agendas and we're like, guys, want to be super respectful of your time with 10 minutes left of the call. And nobody's ever thought like, oh god, I don't like this guy or girl because they've told me they want to be respectful of our time. Right? There's no downside play for sure.
I was curious how Charlie and Kayla think about stories because a lot of people use stories in different ways that I've never heard of outside of what I shared. But
yeah, oftentimes I'm aware of the persona that I may be speaking to, and I think with some personas, stories hit better than others.
right.
I think about recently had a call CFO, and we were talking about that persona. You may identify that as your economic buyer. Who needs to be bought in to make an investment of $30, $40, $50, $60, $100,000? Folks on this call may be seeing more and more that a controller is involved or a CFO is involved. And what we talked about is how case studies aren't necessarily as relevant to him and potentially that persona because they're really looking for objective data. But we can tailor our case study to have objective data in it, which could be more compelling. And Jason, that goes back to preparation. If you're meeting with an economic buyer, it would likely be beneficial to pull some case studies or some stories that have tangible results that you can lean on. That could be more persuasive than a team member saving time or a less fragmented tech stack. That might not be as relevant to a CFO as we were able to increase revenue 20% year over year for company ABC.
I love that.
Tailoring the story. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, typically when the times when I really, really like to use them is around like decision-making processes. It's again, like just trying to offer that insight from what other people in their shoes who are in their exact same job roles, who are at very, very similar companies to them, how those guys have made decisions in the past, not suggesting anything to them, but saying, hey, look, Mr. Prospect, we had this person at XYZ company, and they found that this metric was what they were really looking at. But the other one looked at XYZ as a way to solve their challenges. I'm curious how you guys are going to assess this decision as to whether you guys move forward. So it kind of serves two purposes. Obviously, we're framing and to use Charles's language, like disarming that question of, guys, how are you going to make a decision? But also at the same time as well, like generally trying to educate the buyer, because marketing's so good nowadays. The guys know what you do already by a lot of time. So really helping to educate these guys about how other buyers are doing it is quite actually a lot of the value I think that we can provide as salespeople to keep sales strong as an industry, more than anything else almost.
I think my takeaway from Charlie and Kayla is choose your stories carefully. Or tread lightly, as he said in Breaking Bad, for any Breaking Bad fans.
Just rewatched it a couple months ago, so big fan.
So choose your stories carefully. I think you just made a really great point too, Charlie, in that the part of the conversation that we need to make sure to bring, it's so much easier to get a buyer to really dig into what they're trying to accomplish in their problems if we come with some insights. And I think this whole insight thing gets blown way out of proportion. It doesn't need to be a 30-page white paper that you came with. Like an insight could be, like I talk to a lot of sales leaders about AE self-sourcing. Like I could ask a question like, hey, Charlie, a lot of what we're seeing VPs roll out across their team to get their AEs to self-source more is, one, there's got to be good enablement, right? So do we have talk tracks and things that we can supply to them? But do we have structured power hours where we get teams on and they prospect together like a virtual sales floor? We found that to be really, really effective. How are you enabling your AEs to self-source right now? Like, it's just a very simple, like, is there a tip or something that I can bring to the conversation and just pack it right into the question? And if you have like 2 or 3 of those, it's, I just find the conversations just way different when you're bringing something to the table versus just asking them a ton of questions in that first conversation.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
With regard to stacking questions along with insight, I find that some AEs actually have struggle with providing insight. Like, what does insight mean? What insight can I share? They struggle in that. And I encourage AEs to ask themselves one question is, what do you realize that your prospects don't realize?
Yeah.
What do you realize about them that they don't even realize? And that can help you structure those insights. So in case anybody's having issues with that, I found that to be helpful for AEs in that regard.
Yeah. And then one thing, go ahead, Charlie.
No, I was just going to ask, it sounds great. Can you give us an example, Charles?
Yeah. So I'll just speak about AlphaSense because I'm here. A lot of investors don't realize that, they have a way that they go about searching for things today. Okay. But they don't know that there's another way to do it. And to take it further, because this is the most important part, they don't realize that they can actually get those answers that they're searching for simply because there is another way to do that research that they are not aware of. And so I might say, it's interesting, Charlie, you mentioned that you're doing this research this way. I hear a lot of other clients of mine telling me that if they're able to change their research by doing X, Y, Z, they ultimately are able to have to quickly find the answers that they normally wouldn't find. I'm curious to what extent you've thought about that. right? So Jason knows I like asking to what extent you've thought about, to what extent that surprises you. So I'm sharing something with you that other people in your seat, especially Kayla, if you should tell me a competitor that I work with, that they are realizing works for them. Have you thought about it? You're like, what are you talking about? And then I have you.
Yeah.
A great example.
Again, I think the
Yeah,
big
and that
it's like-
question on the end. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was going to say the big thing there too is like, because people tend to think the insight is the solution. The solution is like is the like job to be done, or the principle or the strategy that your solution drives. It's not the solution itself. So I just want to make that clear. If it like the insight is not your solution, it's what it enables the buyer to do.
Jason, what you just said is gigantic, huge, so small, but it's earth-shattering. But the solution is not the insight. They're not the same thing.
Charlie, you had something to add real quick?
Yeah, almost on that point, which we spoke about earlier, and the question directed to Charles around, how do you create your questions? I think to what extent is a great way of turning any question which we would typically have as closed and allowing it to become open, right? Because we would use them in exactly the same circumstances, except to what extent really opens it up and allows them to almost think in front of us as well and give us opportunities to be more curious. So really, really like that.
That's awesome, everyone. This is a topic you could spend 3 or 4 hours unpacking and barely skim the surface. So I hope there were a lot of great takeaways. I dropped in the links. If you want to check out the free cold calling course, definitely connect with Charlie, Kayla, and Charles. Let's blow up their LinkedIn profiles. So send them a connection request, give them a follow. And Charlie, Charles, Kayla, I appreciate your guys' time. This was extremely valuable and appreciate the engagement from everyone. And yes, we will send out a recording to you afterwards. So that's all we got. Appreciate it, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
We'll see you. Have a good one.